Right, good evening, everybody. This is the MFEN session on early warning systems. Now, I've asked Fiona McDade from Ireland to come and do this one for us because Fiona has led on so much stuff. As you can see from her slide, she's the nurse lead for the National Emergency Medicine Programme in Ireland. So she really knows these things inside out and back to front. I'm about to be educated. I'm sure you're about to be educated. So Fiona, the floor is yours. Do with us as you will. And you won't mind if I keep going. Excuse me. Excuse me. Can you just answer a question?
No problem.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. And as Jeanette said, my name is Fiona McDade, and I'm the nurse lead for emergency medicine programme in Ireland, which the programme is charged with developing a strategy to improve the quality and safety and access and value in emergency medicine. And our original report was issued in 2012, and we're currently reviewing it. And so I lead the implementation of the nursing aspects, and we've developed them all as we've gone along. Right. So as you know, these webinars, we do take...
Fiona, would you like to just click onto where it says slideshow on your tab so that the slides move forward? Just you are on the home tab at the moment, and then you've got insert design, what have you. If you just go along to where it says slideshow.
I put it up on slideshow.
Oh, it's not doing it here.
Yeah, this happened.
It have now. Yes, I'm on presenter stuff now, but that's okay. Don't worry.
So are you on the webinar information now?
I am. Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay. Right. Okay. So as you know, all these webinars are recorded, so you can go back and check what I was saying at a later date, and we'll use the chat function where possible for questions. Okay. So this evening's sessions is about early warning systems. We're going to look at their evolution, why they're required, a bit about the methodology behind them, the types of early warning systems. I've just pulled out 4 specifically to speak about, and then escalation, the pitfalls with them, and then we'll just do a quick summary. So, okay, so the healthcare systems generally around the world are in crisis. It's the environment that we're working in. It doesn't matter which country you're in, everywhere has got crowded. We've got ambulance offload delays. We can't move for the amount of patients. It is very challenging. Plus people can't access primary care. We're losing general practitioners like no one's business. And this is all in the background of severe staffing crisis. We've probably never had as much turnover in staff, and it's the skilled staff that we're losing. So during COVID, we had very little turnover because there's nowhere for people to go. And now a lot of those that were at the end, coming to the end of their careers, have decided, sorry, I've had enough now, I'm going, whether they've got their 40 years or not, because the last few years have been so tough. Australia has opened up again, so we certainly are losing a lot of nurses to Australia, though some of them don't realise that Australia has trolley crises too. And they do have a staffing protocol, which is 1 nurse to 4 patients. But because they are short so many nurses, it actually isn't what's happening in day-to-day life. In Ireland recently, we have had our staffing framework developed, launched, and we're in the process of trying to recruit staff. But as with other countries, we have signed up to this, the international, what's the name of the document? It's basically that we're all fair with where we recruit our nurses from. So that over time is going to reduce the amount of nurses we will be allowed to recruit from the Philippines and India, which is the big overseas recruitment areas at the moment. And it's all about being equitable, and we can't keep depleting their health services when they're in crisis too. So that's kind of the background where we are at the moment. This slide will be familiar. I'm sure some of you have seen it before. This is the world in which we practice. We're in a goldfish bowl. Everybody thinks that they know about our system and that they know more about our system than we know ourselves. And as my colleague, Jerry McCarthy, who's our clinical lead, keeps saying, emergency medicine is trying to fix the plane by flying it. It's not like a brand new service that you're establishing where you can have nice, calm meetings to get it all sorted out, and then you open an in-actual service. Unfortunately, we're having to fix things while we're under extreme pressure. So, origin of early warning systems. So the early editions of early warning systems we saw coming to the health service in the late 1990s, and they were quite primitive. There wasn't a lot of research behind them, but the concept was good and people could see the benefits of them. The original tools that were introduced were all track and trigger. They were basically used to quantify the severity of acute illness. However, these were just tools, they weren't systems, and for a tool to fully benefit the patient and for us to see the patient in a holistic way, then you need a system. So it's not, so you could piece all the whole jigsaw together, because obviously sometimes what you see from looking at the patient and what the monitor tells you are two very different things. So as I said, now we've gone from the single scores to whole system approaches. A lot of the early tools in the last couple of years have been revisited and updated. Now, a lot of the tools still are track and trigger, but they're with aggregated scoring, but not all of them. And now the escalation pathways have been refined, and we've seen progress in the development of rapid response teams and things, which we'll come on to later. And the whole idea is that you get consistent response. So it doesn't matter what time of the day, what day of the week, the patient deteriorates, the response should be consistent. And the evaluation of such tools needs not only to be clinical, i.e. for the benefit directly of the patient, but organizational as to how this organization actually responds to each individual incident. That's why we audit. So, like, the tools are great and you have to know how to use them, but the other side of that coin is why you use them. So the rationale for applying each tool to the various groups. So the aim of the early warning systems, which are used in acute hospitals, is to support the recognition and response to the deteriorating patient. Nobody likes to see a patient deteriorating. The initial systems that were set up were all designed for inpatient wards. They were not designed to meet the needs of the undifferentiated, undiagnosed emergency patient. And the setting on the wards is very different to the emergency care setting. The wards, you don't have a ward manager on 24/7. You don't have medical presence on the ward 24/7. And that's the big difference. And I'll speak more to that later on. But the whole idea is to spot that needle in the haystack. And we now see that some of the ambulance trusts in the UK are using the National Early Warning Score as well. There has been some discussion about this in Ireland, but at the moment they haven't gone there. But we'll see. So following the review of the National Early Warning Score in the UK, which is now News 2, and in Ireland it was News, and now it's iNews, the new version that came out in 2020. And the big difference really with the updates is that they've got this new cycle of care mentioned in the education package. So you're always trying to anticipate events. So you're looking for clues that something may be about to happen. And the wards have now introduced safety huddles, which we'd introduced in emergency departments maybe 10 years ago. And then it's about being able to recognize those cues and knowing what to do with them, escalating them to appropriate person, ensuring you get the right response. And if you don't get the response you anticipate, then to escalate it even higher. And then, going back to review what's happened, to review the escalations and see where the learning is and what needs to be improved. So, and the big thing we want to avoid is what's called the clinical cycle, the cycle of clinical futility. So this is where you repeatedly escalate, but you don't get the response you want, which means the patient doesn't get the treatment they need. And this is often happens, well, it's more likely to happen when you escalate to a more junior member of staff. That's why in the new iNews and News, there's very little escalation goes to an SHO. Most of them will go to a reg. And in a tool that you in the UK won't have heard of, which is called the Emergency Medicine Early Warning System, we only escalate to reg or higher. And I'll explain that system later on. Very similar to News, but there is some subtle differences for our patients. So when they've gone back and looked at what happens with some of the deteriorating patients, you can see the triggers. You can see where the patient was deteriorating, and yes, they were being escalated, but to the wrong person. So the wrong action happened and the patient continues to deteriorate. And sometimes they deteriorate so much, but that it becomes an unsalvageable situation, which doesn't benefit anyone, especially the patient. So it's important that we know why staff don't escalate, so we know how to make sure that they do escalate. So this would also apply to any situation. It's not just early warning systems. So nobody wants to appear incompetent. Nobody wants to be reprimanded. It's changing in hospitals, but certainly some of the juniors, they are nervous, they're frightened. Everybody's so busy, they don't want to be disturbing anyone. And in some, culture comes from the top of the department. If the senior isn't approachable, then you often see that culture then moves down the ranks. So it's important that everybody within the team feels that they can approach anybody for assistance. And in emergency departments, it's probably that's probably fairly well developed in most sites, although now with the higher turnover of staff, it's probably not as good as it should be or was. So it's really important that we maintain that culture of being approachable at all times for whoever has a question, because one day it could be your relative that would benefit from that question being asked.
Fiona, may I just ask, how do you think shift leaders and department leaders learn that culture themselves and to promote it? Because it's not uncommon to hear that people struggle to escalate, that people are frightened of being reprimanded. That's not uncommon at all. And those of us that have worn navy blue, I'm sure, are supposed to occasionally be scary, but mostly be approachable.
I mean, it goes back to the different types of leadership. Okay, so it depends on the situation, as we know, what type of leadership we need. But at the end of the day, some days there will be a deficit in the roster and somebody will have to step up. So you have to, as with the army and all the military, they train everybody to be a leader. So that if the shift leader is then absent, that somebody can step up. And part of that learning to be a leader is being open to those down the line questioning your practice, for want of a better word, or having the confidence to approach you for whatever it is, whether it's with a clinical query, or whether it's something to do with the roster, or it's all about breaking down barriers from lots of different angles so that the team gels. As managers, sometimes you do have to reprimand people, and maybe you're one of your good friends you're reprimanding, but when something happens, it's the way you manage it, and like through your discussion with the staff of the incident, and a no blame culture, because we're there as a team, and all there to help the patients and help each other. So I think if the staff see that if something is going down the tubes, you know, that they can escalate to, then probably go to initially to someone who they see as maybe softer initially, but that they know the message will get through, and that they know that if it turns out that no, actually the patient is fine, that they won't be reprimanded for calling something that wasn't, but that it'll be used as a learning opportunity for them to how that patient's symptoms and what their symptoms presenting physically and what the monitors were telling us all matched together, and why that patient, although they may have looked like they were deteriorating, actually wasn't. So you have to use it as a learning. That would be my view. You know, everybody's different, but yeah. You know, I do feel that, you know, emergency nursing is so pressured that yes, on occasion, like major incident, you have to be the dictator, and sometimes even on the regular shift, you know, you have to be a bit of a dictator. But you know, at the end of the day, we're all there to meet the care needs of the patient. We all want to survive this shift without an incident. So the more open people are to helping each other and to achieving that goal, the quicker the shift goes, and it's a lot less stressful, because there's enough other pressures coming in on top of you to make the shift stressful.
Thank you.
So, so going back through, so this slide falls in very much with what we've just been discussing. So the caseloads that we're seeing now are very complex. I'm 35 years in emergency nursing, and you know, the patients we see now, they wouldn't have survived years ago because the conditions they have. I mean, it's polypharmacy keeping some of them alive, and alive with a very nice quality of life. It's not, you know, keeping them alive for the sake of it. Our caseloads are definitely heavier. We're being pulled in a lot of different directions. The expectations of healthcare are huge. We're expected to be able to cure everything. As I said earlier, we've got quite a lot of junior staff. We do have high turnover. Our skill mix is messed up because the junior senior mix is wrong, and some of the juniors, through no fault of their own and no fault of their managers, but they are having to step up probably quicker than they normally would have been, and it's all to do with the environment that we're in at the moment. You know, and it doesn't matter which department, and whether it's emergency departments or injury units, everywhere staffing levels are being very challenged. And it's not just nursing, it's our medical colleagues. You know, we're about to launch 50 consultants posts in Ireland. Where are we going to get them? You know, our lifestyle isn't that of Australia, and that's what we're battling against. So it is no matter what grade you are in emergency care at the moment, you will feel the pressure, whether it's from the housekeeping staff trying to turn the cubicles round for us, all the ways up to the you know, the consultants and the senior nurses, and right the way through the health structures. So, right, so we're looking for this needle in a haystack. So you've got your in Ireland, the busiest department sees 300 patients a day. I appreciate that in the UK, in some departments, 300 would be a walk in the park, but you know, our system's a little bit different, and our population.
But your staffing will match 300 patients a day.
If only.
Well, maybe not.
If only.
But it won't be in excess of being able to manage 300 patients a day.
No. So
I'm sure that patient workload to staffing resource is no better there than it is in England.
No, absolutely not. But we probably are better than Northern Ireland.
Right.
They do seem to be worse off than us. So we know that acute deterioration is a critical emergency, and we're, you know, emergency nurses, our observation skills are very good. we can pick that one person in the waiting room is about to keel over. It is a learned skill. It is documented as being kind of the sixth sense of an emergency nurse, but you will even find that skill in your long receptionist who's been with your department a long time. They will come and get you when somebody's trying to book in and they're looking a bit blue or a bit grey, and they'll just say, this one isn't right. So it's it's not just a nursing skill. And we know that failure to detect and treat appropriately the patients have adverse outcomes. And nowadays we are audited and from all kinds of angles, and with open disclosure, we have to inform every time something goes wrong. And sometimes the patient thinks something has gone wrong, but actually it hasn't gone wrong. We're expecting that to happen. And so it's also about getting that balance right. But at the end of the day, we do not want patients deteriorating on our shifts. Now, sometimes it's beyond everybody's control, and it's just the catastrophic nature of their illness. So I've identified 4 systems we're going to look at. So the first one is the maternity scoring. I went in life cycle. So we've got maternity, pews, then news 2 or iNews as in Ireland, and then we'll run through the emergency medicine one that we've introduced in Ireland. So they're the 4 that I'm going to run through. Stop me if you want as we go through them. Now, in reality, they're very similar, but there are nuances at the same point. So this is just a slide. It's taken from one of our national clinical guidelines. So you have NICE in the UK and SIGN in Scotland, and we have the National Clinical Effectiveness Unit or Committee, and all the big guidelines have to go through them. It's quite a lengthy process. It takes around 2 years, and it breaks your heart. But
said with huge feeling.
Oh, yes.
I know that feeling.
But saying that, it means that the standard of the guidelines is very high, and there is behind each one of these ones that are mentioned up here, there is a full research piece. So emergency medicine, our one goes from triage through to decision to admit or point of discharge from emergency medicine. Pews is an inpatient tool. The news is an inpatient tool. The maternity ones go from point of admit presentation all the way through to 42 days post delivery. Then we have one that's for clinical handover, and there's 2 of them. One is children in acute hospitals, and the other one is maternity. And then we have the sepsis. So, and they all kind of fall in together, and those last 2 work across the full spectrum of acute care. So that's how they all slot together. So before we move on, does anybody have any questions? I meant to move the slide around, but okay, right here. So we'll dive into our early warning systems. So we're going to start with maternity. In Ireland, it's called the Irish Maternity Early Warning System, but you also have a maternity and obstetrics early warning system, and you have the maternity early warning system. So it depends where you are, what it's called, but essentially they all look at the same. They're all single trigger systems, and they go from the point that the woman knows she's pregnant up to all the way to 42 days post delivery. So they're the 4, just different names depending where you are, but they in fact, when I looked at them all, they all work the same. So they are all single trigger systems, and this is just a copy of the charts. I've got one from Northern Ireland, which is the one on the left, and then the purple one on the right is the Irish one. So they they have a unique response depending on the colour that the vital sign falls into. And the Irish one has just gone through a review, but essentially there wasn't really any changes. There was a small tweak in the education package. And the other thing with this one is that if the woman presents with something like a head injury or something neuro, such as query subarachnoid or anything, you do have to pull in the Glasgow Coma score from your usual source. With us, it's on our EMU's chart, but so you then start running into the issue with multiple charts, and it is an issue in the mixed emergency departments where you've got the full life cycle, because you will be running well, in Ireland, you'd be running 4 early warning system charts at any one time. So it is a bit of a challenge. But going back to maternity, once you're in a white box, you're fine. You just continue to monitor. And then the more yellows you get, the higher person you have to escalate to. And then when it's red, most of the time you're going up to the labour ward, and it's the consultant that they're speaking to. And from what I understand, it works very well. There was a case here, the Savita Halapanava case from 2014, and that really spurred on the development of IMUs in Ireland and the sepsis protocol for the pregnant woman. So it all links back to that lady's case, and I'm sure there's been similar cases in the UK.
I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I know we've had a couple of nasty cases where I work that certainly caused a few scratched heads and lots of debriefs. Just for those of you who are watching, if you want to go through the Muse in great detail, we do have a lecture in the clinical set of lectures, the MFEN lectures, that is on I'm trying to think whether it's the one on emergency delivery or it might be pregnancy in a nutshell. One of them's called pregnancy in a nutshell, one of them's called emergency delivery, and the midwife who's done those lectures goes through the Muse in great detail, so that you can follow through exactly how to implement it with an individual patient.
And those of you from Ireland, the Irish maternity early warning system is up on HSE land and is a compulsory module for emergency nurses. Right, so this diagram is taken directly from the eMuse e-learning, and it shows how the iMuse directly links to all the other systems, and it's just kind of a handy diagram. But basically, if you're pregnant, you're going to be on a minimum of iMuse, and you potentially could end up with a GCS. And the iMuse is also used for the under 16s. Originally, it was thought that it wouldn't be, but it is. So that was a bit of a new one for the.
That's an under 16 who's pregnant, is it?
Yeah. So that was a new one for because we have 3 emergency departments that are children only in Ireland, in the city. So, sorry, no. Oh, this was showing this. I'm sorry, I was just wondering what I put up. This slide here just shows you in greater detail the actual escalation, and on all the IMU's charts, the escalation is down on the reverse of the observation chart, which is very useful, especially for those of us in emergency care who wouldn't be using the IMU's on a regular basis. So it really makes it all sit very nicely together. Right, so children. So now children has the pediatric early warning system. It is a tool that's designed for the inpatient areas, but in the absence of one for emergency departments, it is being used in emergency departments in Ireland. We do plan to write an emergency children's warning system, but not quite yet. It'll be probably the back end, probably into 2024, to be honest, because there's just a lot going on with other things at the moment. But anyway, I digress. So with the paediatric early warning system, it is based on an age bands, and it's really important that you use the right chart for the right age group. And it's used all the way up to the 16th birthday, even though in a lot of things we consider them adults when they're reached 12. But in the case of Pews, it goes all the way up to 16th birthday. And as I said, it's for admitted children, but we are using it in emergency care at the moment. So
I hadn't appreciated, Fiona, that Pews was actually designed as an inpatient tool, because I know ours won't be the only departments that have had paediatric interest, shall we say, in us using Pews and using it very consistently. So it's very interesting that you say, actually, it's an inpatient tool.
It's like news. It's for the diagnosed.
I feel a research project.
Yeah, we've already started doing some work on this, but it's maybe the differences in peds won't be as big as we found with adults, but certainly with the bronchiolitis season we're having this year, you know, you're trying to apply a tool that's for somebody who's diagnosed to somebody that isn't diagnosed. But plus, on top of that, with children, you have all the different age ranges. Now, in the charts we use, it's this little icon up here in the top left-hand corner of the chart that refers you to the right age range. But also with children, you haven't just got their actual age. We also have those children with complex medical needs who may be 9 or 10, but are the size of a 5 and 6 year old. So
I was going to ask you about that, because that applies with adults with very complex needs as well, doesn't it?
Yeah,
there are issues.
I mean, with adults, you know, as we all know, if they're under 50 kilos, they have to be weighed for their medications, and you have to be really careful, because we always think of, you know, standard dosing for adults. With children, we are aware of the need that everything is weight based, but the charts are age based. And it's just, you just have to remember that you could be dealing with a child that, yes, they're 9 years old, but because of their genetic condition, they're the size of a 3-year-old. So, you know, yeah, and it has to be documented which chart you're using. And if you're not using the chart for the child's actual age, you have to put why you're not using the chart for the actual age, just to be, so it's all clear and concise. And
so I think, it sounds to me like you're on all paper charts. Now, some departments over here are all electronic, and I can see that computer is going to say no about something like that.
Yeah.
But my patient's chronological age, the computer tells me, is 9. I don't have the option to pick a chart. So that's maybe something there in the specification of the system that needs to allow you to pick a different age chart.
Allowance for override.
That could be a problem and a half.
Yeah.
Another one of those 2-year jobs.
Yeah, I mean, the other, you know, these kind of issues, they have to be discussed with pediatrics, and, you know, either your pediatric emergency medicine consultant or the head of clinical director for peds, and a decision has to be made so that everybody knows and all the children are done the same way, you know. But yeah, we're only starting to go to electronic recording of vital signs, where it does the printout and everything. So but don't forget, on most of those, on most non-invasive physiological monitoring systems, you can set the parameters and everything that the machines will trigger at.
Yes,
so
of course. You can always change the alarms on the
alarm
machines.
systems. But yeah, it is, you know, it's something that people don't always think about. Now, I haven't done peds for years, so, you know, I'm always very wary of peds because you know, I've got a bit rusty on some of my peds knowledge. I do my best to keep up with it, but you know, it is something that you have to think of. It's just that years ago in the adult system, we weren't treating those that were, you know, under 50 kilos differently. But now with the genetic build has changed of the population, people are very weight conscious. So you're getting a lot of more people in that run less than the 8 kilos, the 50 kilos, the 8 stone mark. You know, either because of their build, because we've got more Asian kind of genes coming into the population in the Western world.
Yes,
and they're much more petite than us.
Hadn't thought of that.
Or it's because you know, you look at the number of youngsters that want to be a size 0, you know, and they are they're not necessarily anorexic, they just seem very thin. And even some of the Eastern Europeans, they're very slim compared to us Celts.
Okay. So, the Celts are a bit more stocky, are they, Fiona?
Yes. Generous proportions. You know, just like you get the Nordics, they're all tall.
They are, yes.
Yeah,
you look at the Nordics and you think, oh, crikey, crick in my neck. And I thought I was tall.
Yeah, the Welsh and the Irish tend to be shorter and built like rugby players, basically. So, but anyway.
That's why you're good at the game.
Well, they are at the moment anyway. So this is the escalation guide for the pews. I have taken this from the Irish one, but I'm fairly certain from what I could find on the internet is exactly the same in the UK. So it's, you know, about making sure that you escalate to the right level, and that when vital signs are being recorded, that they are done accurately. And as Jeanette mentioned earlier, we are in Ireland still predominantly paper-based, and having done some reviews of charts, it's amazing the number of people who can't write vital signs in the right box. And can't add up. So that is one, you know, you have to be diligent. You know, they're vital signs for a reason. And so you have to be diligent in your recording and diligent in your recording of the on the paper of the vital signs.
So I can see from that slide, Fiona, exactly what you mean about this being designed for an inpatient response, because looking at that, that's not an inpatient an emergency escalation guide, is it?
No.
That's definitely, I'm on a ward and there's a nurse in charge and there's a doctor at the other end of a bleep. Yeah. That isn't what you've got available to you in emergency department. So that bit I can see is absolutely not right for where you've got more senior nurses and always a doctor parked with you.
Yeah. And I
might not be he or she might not be able to just put everything down and come, but they are there.
No, you just guide them by the elbow over to where you want them to go.
Come with me, doctor. Yeah. Look at this child, doctor.
And we'll come on to that again a little bit later, about the, you know, why news doesn't necessarily fit an emergency. Okay, so that's the pregnant lady and the child. So does anybody have any questions? No. Okay. So does anybody want a drink before we move on? I'm going to go on to the adults now.
Shall we just take a few minutes so that you can have a drink as well?
Yep. Go. Okay. So now we're going to move on to the adult systems. I identified the the National Early Warning Score, as it's known in the UK, which is known as the Irish National Early Warning Score in Ireland, and the Emergency Medicine Early Warning System, as the two that we will look at, as they're the ones commonly used. So we'll start with News 2, as you know it, and iNews, as it's known in Ireland. And we'll just look at the background to this particular tool. iNews is based on the news. We implemented initially a couple of years after News went live in the UK, and both systems were updated in 2020. So the National Early Warning System, as it's now called, previously it was a score, is designed for inpatient areas. So it is designed for the ward area where you don't have senior nursing staff on 24/7 and you don't have senior medical presence on the ward at all times. They're aggregated score systems, and each parameter can be scored from 0 to 3. Any single score of 3 requires escalation, as does an aggregate score of 6. So that's what it's based on. So there's been a lot of research done around the aggregated scoring. Rob Way and a few others from Oxford were doing a huge project around machine learning and aggregate scoring, and the importance of introducing electronic or digitizing the recording of vital signs. Certainly from when I've been asked to do reviews, it is amazing how many scores have been miscalculated. Generally speaking, it's miscalculated because the scores have either been written in the wrong box, or so because they're written in the wrong box, then when you glance at the chart to add up the scores, you've got a score that should have been written maybe in a red box, was written in a white box, and you just look at the colors and you suddenly add up something that should have come out maybe as a 9 as a 4. It is amazing that even if the vital signs are written in the right box, the number of people who cannot add up. But
it's a bit worrying, considering they also do the drug calculations.
It is, but it's also the sign of a system and staff that are under pressure. They're rushing.
Yes, because they're not taking time to do the calculation at their speed.
Yeah, they're also, and it's also is possibly a demonstrator of people not valuing vital signs. They think, oh God, I've got to do, we did it.
Do the OBS again.
Oh God, I've got to do an OBS round. When actually those vitals, they're called vital signs for that reason, that they are vital, but also they give us so many indicators as to how our patient is doing. And so it's really worth taking the time to accurately record them. And you do have to count the respirations. You don't do a guesstimation. It's amazing how many charts you look at and everybody's reps are 16, and yet
right.
puffed away, so, it's, it is a good tool when it's used in the right environment. On the first issues of the tool, you were allowed to make adjustments for chronic conditions. When on the retrospective reviews, they found that the adjustments were being made by the wrong person, as in grade of medical staff, and for the wrong reasons, i.e. it was made by junior medical staff, and they were being put at a level so they wouldn't be called. That was obviously detrimental to the patient. And that has come out in some of the national reviews, which is rather, not good for for the image of the junior docs. But again, you can see why they did it. They're to the pin of their collar. They're being asked to do too much. And, medicine, like nursing, is so complex. And now they have these safari ward rounds. It used to be that, you know, all the renal patients were on the renal ward. Now God knows where they could be, you know. So they're running from Billy to Jack to try and get the jobs done, and it's so you can see why somebody do it, and it's human nature. But the system is setting up everybody to fail, both the patient and the staff. So this is going back to the diagram I showed you earlier about the new steps that were put in the education packages, and this one about anticipating, you know, the potential for deterioration. And we know that if there's an increasing need for oxygen, because the saturations aren't rising with the increase in oxygen, then something is wrong. So, you know, if sitting up the patient in the bed doesn't help, then you do need, you know, something else from your arsenal to help the patient, and that invariably involves getting some help from someone. Like as Justice said, they're located outside the specialist ward. This is becoming a real issue, and you know, we've lost the old way where we had all cohorted wards, and it's due to the outflow issues that the health system has. The patients that keep coming in the doors, there's loads and loads, but we can't get them out to either community care or home or whatever the needs, because there just isn't sufficient beds. Now some sites have got to this, have now implemented where they cohort all the ones who are waiting for long-term care together, but then yes, they're cohorted together because they all need long-term care. The problem is they all need long-term care for different reasons. So it's still a safari ward, but what can you do?
We've just been too successful, Fiona.
Yeah,
this is the thing. We've been so very successful at healthcare that people are living longer with a very good quality of life, as you said before. But of course, the longer you live, the more things can go wrong.
Yeah, victims
and the
of
longer it takes, indeed, and the longer it takes to get out, you know, to get better from whatever has laid you low this time.
And
well, it is. Yeah, but it's kind of reassuring as well that you're saying you've got the same problem in Ireland that we have, that we can't get medically optimized way of going for at the moment, medically optimized for discharge. We can't get those patients out. So there's nowhere to go. And you're having the same problem.
Yeah, and we know with those with chronic illness or the elderly and frail, that we never, after each bout of illness, we never get them back to where they were pre-illness.
No, never.
So that, you know, we don't. So it is this, you know, it's a long gradual slope for them. We know there's all these new medications coming on stream. A lot of them, not only are they complex to administer, but the side effects are complex, and sometimes you don't necessarily get the same side effects in people. So we're getting people coming into the emergency department who may have had chemo today or yesterday, with some very unusual side effects, you know, and they're ripe for deterioration. Then, you know, we do have issues around communication. There has been huge work done in the health systems around communication. As I said earlier, we have 2 national guidelines relating to communication, but you have to remember there's always going to be the cultural issues around communication, and you still will have some cultures that won't talk to other cultures or will talk down to other cultures. That doesn't bode well for good team building, and you have to have open communication or the whole system falls over. And then we have the old sixth sense or gut feeling of the nurse that something just isn't right here. So, and if you have that, always act on it. 9 times out of 10, you'll be right.
It is very weird how you are usually right about your gut feeling, but I'm blowed. Well, when I was younger, I was blowed if I could tell you exactly what was wrong, and I could have gone over the patient and done their obs and got the doctor to go over the patient. We'd find nothing. But then about 3 or 4 hours later, something would go wrong.
Yep.
It's weird.
Yeah. So
if we could just bottle whatever that was, it'd be great.
So what's new in news or iNews 2? It's changed from being a score to a system. So you now have the response to the increasing scores. Clinical judgment has been brought to the fore. That really was implied rather than mentioned before. And AVPU has been changed to ACFAPU because they've now got new onset confusion in.
I like that though, Fiona. I think that's a really good. That's a really good modification because alert voice pain unresponsive. It never quite gave you enough to work with, but
no, especially
I see hope for new onset confusion.
Yeah, well, also, like you have to consider, like apart from the fact that people are living longer, they're also living with cognitive impairment, and that's why we rely so much on the carers. You know, is this confusion their normal, or is this something new?
I know. What were they like 3 months ago? Oh, they're fine. Out doing their shopping. Oh dear, right.
Yeah, exactly. So, so this is the Irish version of the chart, but as far as I know, the escalation is exactly the same for both. And again, if you look at the terminology, it is, you know, well, it does mention, it mentions about escalation to SHOs or AMPs. An AMP is an advanced nurse practitioner. They are all independent practitioners educated to a minimum of MSc. There are a number of them with doctorates, although they tend to be emergency rather than in-house ones. So we have critical care outreach, which tends to be led by nurse practitioners. So they're a bit more than the EMP. They'd be like your advanced clinical practitioners. Are they up at master's level?
Yeah.
So,
we have ANPs as well in our critical care outreach, and they're all masters. If they're not got one, they're doing one.
Yeah. So as you can see from this, you know, the terminology being used is very much inpatient terminology.
Hadn't really thought of that before, Fiona. But it's all about tell the nurse in charge, tell the doctor on call.
Yeah, exactly.
Which isn't what we've got.
No.
I've been brainwashed before. I haven't paid enough attention to this.
Right. So now the next suite of slides are all about a tool that's I co-chaired the national development of with Dr. Fogel-Hickey, who's consultant in emergency medicine, Sligo. So this will be, for those of you in the UK, this will be new. For those in Ireland, they're sick of me beating the drum that this must be implemented. We're down to the last few sites, but it has been...
Have you been reprimanding the staff, Fiona?
Oh, gentle reminder at all national meetings. Okay, so it's a national clinical guideline. It was launched in October 2018, and it was supposed to be fully implemented by December 2020, but a little thing called COVID hit. So we got a year's extension to 2021, and that was subsequently not formally extended, but I did get an extension to this December. And where, as I said, I'm on to the last sites for training. It's been a slow gestation. So why did we develop something a little bit different? Okay, so the national clinical programs in Ireland were born in 2010. We started, and we were to have our first meeting that Christmas. We start in September. We were to have the first meeting in December, but we had the bad snow, so we didn't get our first meeting till January 2011. And at that meeting, myself and the other nurse who'd been appointed lead at the time, I'm on my own now, but we in discussion with the nurse managers, we set up the emergency nursing interest group, and we got all the nurse managers nationally from emergency departments into a room and said, right, what do we need to do to sort out emergency nursing in Ireland? So there was various things that came up, and one of them was to standardise the approach to vital sign recording, because you had students coming in, and you found them doing vital signs on an ankle, but not on a chest pain, and so we needed to be able to have a proper rationale for what we did and when we did it. So that was that. So April 2011, I started the work. We were at pilot stages going into 13, 14, and we were ready to launch, and then told we had to go national clinical guideline in 16, and it took to 18 to get it finally signed off. So it's quite a long gestation, but it's there now, and it'll be up for review probably in 2025. So we have investigations done by the Health Information and Quality Authority, which would be similar to your CQC in the UK. And there was one done on a hospital in Ireland called Tala University, and it was following the death of a patient in the emergency department. The patient died on a trolley, and it was unnoticed, the deterioration. So emergency,
I think if we're honest, Fiona, that's happened in more than just that department.
Oh yeah, I mean, we know in Ireland it's yeah. I did actually try. I went through our state claims agency to actually find out how often it had been reported and how much were the payouts. But the way they record the stuff, it proved very difficult to get the information. But there has been payouts following it. So emergency medicine at the time was told, you either implement the National Early Warning Score or you develop your own. So we developed our own. So it is first national solution for emergency medicine. It is a structured approach to monitoring for emergency medicine. It does, however, generate new work, which is monitoring of the waiting room. So we now monitor the waiting room. It's a designated role for after triage, so it falls into the post-triage phase of care. If we didn't have the crowding, we probably wouldn't need that role. So it is counted as a crowding stroke surge management tool as well. And at the moment, following the launch of our framework for safe staffing and skill mix, we are currently recruiting the increase in staff to monitor the waiting room. Now, each site had to identify their resource required for the waiting room. So they had to look at how many people were in the waiting room, how many were triage 2, 3, and 4 around the clock for a week. So it's quite a piece of work. So what is the difference between the emergency medicine early warning system and iNews or news, as you want to call it? Ours is developed solely around the unscheduled, undifferentiated patient, and iNews is for the admitted patient, because on a ward area that has a working diagnosis. So eNews, as I said earlier, goes from triage up to decision to admit. And iNews goes from decision to admit when they're formally discharged from the hospital after their inpatient stay.
So do you swap chart at the point of decision to admit then, Fiona?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So decision to admit is like, right, change the charts, we're going for inpatient equivalent now.
Yeah, but actually you'll see the charts now in a minute. You can actually continue on to run out of boxes on the chart either. Okay. So now obviously the caseload is ever increasing in emergency departments. So we had to work a way around to ensure that the tool was manageable. So the tool is applied to all patients aged 16 years and over, because it's an adult tool, and it is applied to triages 2, 3, and 4. Now, there is a reason behind that. So triage ones are
supposed to be seeing them already, aren't you?
Yes, they are in resus and they have their own resus pathway, so they're catered for. Triage 3s and 4s who present with non-life or limb-threatening injuries and only require over-the-counter analgesia are also excluded. They are going down the AMP pathway in most cases. However, if the wait becomes prolonged and they may require further analgesia, they are subsequently considered to go on the pathway. And triage 5, by definition, have no pain and the problem's more than a week old. So therefore not acutely ill. So they're excluded. Now, obviously, if things change, then they have to be considered like all the other patients. So, all the patients registered and triaged, and then they start on their post-triage phase of care, which is when EMU starts. So as we use Manchester Triage in Ireland for adults, and we use the Irish Children's Triage for children, and I'll talk about those in 2 weeks' time. But anyway, so as we know, in Manchester Triage, all the triage twos are supposed to be seen within 10 minutes. And everybody said, Fiona, you're cracked. We won't be able to review these patients within 10 minutes. But when you actually break down what we are doing for the triage twos, a lot of triage twos, because they have pain. So your 10-minute review is you giving them the pain relief. If they present with chest pain, it's them getting their ECG. If they present with shortness of breath, then it's them getting their nebulizer. So that is your first 10-minute review. Then the triage 3s need to be reviewed within the hour, and triage 4s within 2 hours. So it's following the Manchester Triage steps. And it made sense to keep that structure because it's structure that we're used to, and the times are drummed into us. Unfortunately, we're not meeting them, but it is drummed into us. So we then took the charts, and we've changed the charts somewhat, but the differences are subtle and don't. For the operator, they're not big changes. Okay, so we use the triage colours. When we put out to the staff about using the news colours, they said blue caused confusion because blue in emergency care is triage 5, and yet in news it's a higher score. So we use the triage colours. We had to increase the number of boxes under respiratory rates, and that's because news just says greater than 25, and in emergency care there's a big difference to us for the patient that's breathing at a rate of 25 to 35 plus. And this proved very useful, obviously, with COVID, although the original design was more about the asthmatics. So we go 25 to 29, 30 to 34, and greater than 35. And that enables us to see the trend visually as they improve after their medication. Heart rate, we had to increase the boxes up to 220 from 180 because the SVTs were off the Richter scale. Temperatures, we had to make an adjustment there, and that was to cater for the oncology patients who are now treated as day cases coming in with their sepsis. So we went up to 41.5, but that proved very fortunate because COVID, the patients were coming in with temperatures of 41.5. And then we go down to 32.5. We had planned to go lower, but we ran out of space on the obs chart is the basic reason. Although, and we also chatted amongst our colleagues, and we, on balance, we were seeing more hyperpyrexias than we were hypothermias. So it made sense that we made more accommodation of the hyperpyrexias. So our chart, now we designed the chart as a standalone document, because when we were doing this, the emergency departments were also redesigning their nursing charts. So we, and as nurse lead, I was also working on the modular nursing for national rollout as well. So the chart is designed as standalone, but in practice now it's being slotted into the new charts that departments have been developed. And we have what's called quality care metrics in Ireland, which are based around our nursing standards. So we tried to include as many of the quality care metrics in the chart, so everything was in one place. So when you went to do your audits, you weren't digging through mountains of paper. So we have the standard things that you would have on any chart. So we have the address graph, the hospital name and its emergency medicine chart, that the identity band is being worn, quality care metric, the flag that if the lady is pregnant to go to IMUs as well, falls bracelet, quality care metric, allergies, quality care metric, analgesia, quality care metric. Then we have some free text, sepsis flags, the white box, which was adaptable to the department needs. That's the key charts that a lot of patients use, and it's to make sure that when the patient went to the ward, that all the papers went in one go, to save you 5 return visits to the ward. Then there's a note about clinical escalation, about the chart being the escalation protocol being used with the chart, and there's various other additions in the escalation policy. You know, that you need all the things for the system to work. You can't just rely on what the machines are telling you. Always look at your patient. So pages 2 and 3 of the chart, the departments can't change. Pages 1 and 4 they can, and so this is our chart. Now, we developed it in A4 because most departments use clipboards, so it fitted, but you could rotate it and have it in the same format as the news chart, which is you know, a portrait A3 if you wanted. You just can't change the content. So as with all early warning systems, we have date, time and frequency of vital signs at the top. As you can see, we use red and at the top, and there's the extra boxes that we put in for respiratory rate, but the transition between each color is exactly the same as the news chart. We did not change that because the evidence suggested that they were set at the right markers. We have got gray boxes in, so when you go to transition onto a news chart, you can work out the score, but we do not use any. We're a single trigger system, so we do not use any scores. Excuse me. Then we have FiO2 and whether the patient's on oxygen as per all the other systems. Then we have our blood pressure, which again is exactly the same as the news chart, and there's our temperatures, our pulses at the bottom. And you will see a watermark in the first 3 columns. 2 say pre-hospital, 1 says triage. The 2 pre-hospital ones are to transcribe but not sign for the first and last set undertaken by the pre-hospital team. And this is to set the trend, because as we know, our pre-hospital colleagues are administering an awful lot of medications. So the patient they arrive to is very different to the patient that arrives with us. Now, in some, like in Dublin, you know, they'd be lucky to get 1 set of vital signs done. But if you're travelling in from West Donegal to Letterkenny, it's anything up to a 2-hour transfer, as same with West Cork into CUH. And I'm sure there are parts of Northern Ireland, Scotland, England and Wales that would have equally long transfer times. So it is to give credit to that care that's been given, and to help, it helps us in setting the trend for the future care of the patient as well. So a lot of patients, those that don't go by ambulance, their vital signs will start recording in column 3. And then down the side here, we have just a flash note about the frequency of the recording of the vital signs, and then about using ISBAR in all your communications. And these red flags, they are the exact same as on the eMuse chart. We originally were going to amalgamate the iMuse chart with this, but it became such a mess. We were going to set everybody up to fail, and a patient was going to suffer. So we got rid of that idea. So then we go to page 3. Now, we swapped the sequencing then of the vital signs. We've put temperature ahead of AVPU. And that's because if you score red on any section of AVPU, you must do a GCS. And the GCS is the 2014 40-year review of GCS wording. So it's actually much easier for the juniors to understand. And then we've got a couple of boxes at the bottom about blood glucose and capillary refill. So, and then again, we have the flag, all the flags that appear on your news chart. So then on page 4, we have some more free text, ISBAR reminder. This table is the conversion on for transferring onto the news chart, or God forbid, if there was a bed available straight away, that you could actually work out the score ready for the patient. There is a guideline in Ireland that says every patient going to the ward must have had their vital signs recorded within the previous hour before transfer. And apparently the wards also use the news score as one of their markers for deciding where the patient should go on the ward. And
yeah,
then
we have that as well, that they want the news. No, it's kind of, am I having them under my nose or not? They over here, they often want the news and the Waterloo.
Oh, yeah, and then see whether they need a mattress.
Yeah.
As
well as the infection risk, of course. Do
yeah.
I need a side room? Do I need them under my nose? Do they need special equipment? And that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, except that some people will score high, but they're not that sick. But anyway, I'll come on to that. So, and then these white ones here. So when we piloted the chart, what some of the sites wanted was boxes that they could put the iNews or the iNews score into, and that was the score that they were transferring the patient at, which is fair enough. So, and if I just go back one slide, you can see like there's quite a few columns. So that's why some sites kind of keep going with this chart until they run out of columns and then go on to the news chart. And that's why they wanted the inbuilt grey boxes, so that when they transferred onto the other chart, they could work out the score so that the trending wasn't lost. Which, when you're developing all these things, you have to think of the practicalities. And if that makes people's life easier, then it's a simple thing to do. So obviously, maintaining somebody at 10-minute obs is a huge workload, and obviously doesn't always benefit the patient, and certainly doesn't always benefit the nursing resource.
You can get nothing else done.
Exactly. So we have built in a mechanism of how to reduce the recording of the vital signs. Now, so if we start at the top, you must have triage plus one other set done before you can reduce. And it's all at each frequency, it's always a minimum of 2 sets before you can consider reducing. So if we start with the algorithm, if we go down the left leg, so patients had 2 sets of vital signs undertaken, and they're considered to be within normal limits. So therefore you can reduce down to the next frequency. So if they're on 10 minutes, we say to go to half an hour before hourly, because to go from 10 minutes to hourly is a huge jump. And then you can do 2 hours, 2 sets at half hourly. If they're okay, you go to hourly. And then you reduce down to, in Ireland, we've set a maximum of 4 hourly. And that's because we're supposed to have our patients in and out of the system within 6 hours. So therefore, anybody who required vital signs would have had a minimum set of 2 sets done. So therefore, in theory, you've had starting of a trend. So, and in actual fact, when obviously the consultants were in on the development of the tool, and the Consultants Association, that was their only big request, that there be recordings at the lowest rate, it's 4 hourly, and that the escalation protocol, which we'll come on to, is manageable. And so we did our best. So that's that. So we are single trigger escalation, and we have 4 types of escalation. There, as I discussed them, there was some controversy, as you can imagine, about some of them. Single vital sign, that is because our patients are undifferentiated and undiagnosed. We're a cradle to the grave specialty. Now, obviously, this is for the 16 years and over. And as we know, a lot of our young people have things like car accidents, and they also compensate extremely well. So sometimes it's just that their pulse is just creeping up a little bit. It might just be tipping the 100. So it wouldn't score a 3. They might be, they may get a 1 or a 2, but they wouldn't be scoring high. But the creeping pulse with the mechanism of injury is a flag. Also, we have to consider our elderly. They are often on medications that will impact their vital signs. And also, you know, the Western world, yes, we have an obesity crisis, but also people are far more aware of their health. And you see a lot of people are now more into fitness. So we have a couple of famous rowers called Fintan McCarthy and Paul O'Donovan, who are the rowers. Now, if you did their vital signs, you would find their resting pulse is probably only mid-40s at the most. So a tachycardia for them is probably 55, 60. You know, so it has to be taken into context of each individual patient. Now, we are lucky in that there is the fitness watches are also a fashion item these days. So there's lots of people wearing fitness watches. They mightn't do any fitness, but they'll be able to tell you what their resting pulse is and maybe their blood pressure. So at least we do have those markers for some patients. But we really did feel that that single vital sign was important for our type of patient. Clinician concern. So this is where the vital signs may be all right, but you just know that that patient is not right. This, from an emergency nursing perspective, is probably most common with the subarachs. I know from many years ago when I was staffing, I was doing triage one day and a lady came in. She was 11 weeks postpartum, and she presented with the headache. And I thought, okay. And the story, there was just something I wasn't happy about. And I just said to the partner, you know, why is she here? And he said she didn't remember the child's name. And I thought, oh Lord, 11-week-old, first baby, you don't remember the child's name? There's something definitely wrong here. So at the time, now, I am going back many, many years, probably, it would have probably been mid-90s. And at the time, we didn't have 24-hour CT. And this was a Friday. So it was Friday and around 4:30, 4:45. So I ran down to the consultant and I gave him the story and I said, I think she needs CT. And he came down, said, yes, you're right. So we got CT done at 5 o'clock just before radiology finished. And the CT was clear. And I said, no, that can't be right. And unfortunately, by the time I was going off shift that night, that lady's GCS was down to 8. And she was transferred to neuro. She did have a big bleed, but unfortunately, she died after her surgery. And, you know, so yes, my intuition was right. We just probably, if it hadn't been the fact that I was conscious that CT was closing and we had done it at normal triage 2 speed, we probably would have caught her when the bleed started, but not when it got to such a severe level, you know. And, you know, majority of experienced emergency nurses will be able to rattle off cases like that. And other ones that are often the MIs that you just know they're going to arrest. So, you know, you just know by the way things are going, that things aren't quite going to go according to plan. Patient concern, as you can imagine now, there was a lot of resistance to putting this in. However, if you look at the research, especially relating to cardiovascular patients, those that have a fear of doom or a fear of dying generally don't do well. They either die within a short period of time, or their recovery is very slow, very complex, and they often don't reach as good an outcome as they should have done. So you're going to have the patient who is always giving out, oh, I have to be seen, I'm really sick, But, as you progress in your emergency nursing career, when you put the whole picture together, you not always, but 90+% of the time, you will know which ones are the ones you need to get somebody to see now, and which ones can hold on. Again, family concern, there was a lot of resistance around this. I kept saying, but Fiona, it's an adult too. The patient, you've got patient concern, they can speak up for themselves. However, I took a different view. My view was that we've had family concern in children for, all the time. We now have children surviving to adulthood who 10 years ago wouldn't have survived. So we need their family to speak up for them. We also have lots of people in their older years who've got cognitive impairment. And so we need their family and carers to speak up for them, because they'll be able to tell us what is normal for them, so we can identify what is now abnormal. And that's really important. We're doing lots of work around our clinical environments to make sure that there's appropriate for these groups. So, we have to make sure that our clinical care is appropriate. So I just think it's really important that we have that in. As I think, as we move forward, especially then with advanced directives as well, it'll also come in to more to our decision making. So this is our escalation. At first glance, it looks complicated, but in actual fact, it's it's designed for the most junior of staff nurses caring for a patient. It's done on an A4 page, which can be blown up to poster size if you want, or it can be laminated and attached to all the clipboards because it's IPC friendly, or you can put it on the walls. It was kind of designed that way. So box A has about the patient's triage category and their general physiological condition. Box B then just reminds you about we're using the chart, the EMU's chart, and about escalating quickly to senior staff. Box C is a gentle reminder again about presenting complaints, managing pain, the simple things that can help de-escalate situations and deteriorating levels of various physiological markers. Then we come down to the squares. Now, because we're a single trigger, you have your starting colours that the patient arrives in it, and then you have the colours that the patient gains. So that's the premise for the escalation. Now, so if you gain one or more yellows, or two or more yellows, so an orange or a red. Now, the terminology in the white boxes currently is a bit vague, but that can be modified by each individual department. And that's because I know it is 2022, but there are some sites that have only got 24/7 consultant and emergency medicine cover since COVID. And also senior reg cover. So that is why it doesn't say escalate to registrar, escalate to consultant. And also some of our sites are quite small. And so one nurse runs the whole show. And then we have our big departments that are seeing, 70,000, which I know is small by UK standards, that are running zones, and you have a nurse in charge of each zone. So when the departments take this form, they put in the terminology that they use. So it then gives them ownership of the escalation. So
I think that seems very sensible, Fiona, because actually the same pertains everywhere. Different sites are differently laid out.
yeah, so
And
some
so
sites are
going to want to do something slightly different.
Some say zone A, zone B, zone C. Some do zone 1, 2, 3. Some do colours. You know, so it has to be. They have to have ownership if this is going to work.
And some give them names, don't they, rather than numbers or letters or colours.
Yeah, especially when with peds. You know, so and then the bottom box is, you know, about making sure you're using the right chart. So now you've seen how this works. We'll go on to support documents. I just want to mention about triage and this tool compared to news. So the whole thing comes as a package. So we have a patient monitoring plan, and that's a bit like the document that's on the back of the news chart. So we do get patients in that have been in the hospital before, and there will be documented documentation of previous vital signs. So in this, we were thinking primarily around the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease patient, where their SATs are never 100, that their best SAT is only ever 92, 93. And so, so if you have their old chart and it is documented that the patient's best is 94%, then the doctor can write on this chart that you know, that call me if they drop below the 94, as opposed to normally we say if it's below 96. So there is that flexibility for those chronic disease patients. There's also the event log, which is the standard, which you record the date, the time of the event, the actions taken, the response, and who identified the deterioration, and the name of the respondent and the PIN, their PIN numbers. So it's the standard as with others. Then we have staff information leaflets, frequent and asked questions. There's the audit tool, which is the same essentially as the one used for news, and there is a KPI. So, you know, it is a fully rounded system. Now, so I couldn't remember, right. So it is the first emergency department specific tool. It was a long road to travel. Our big reason, well, one of the big indicators for us to go this way was that if you use news in the emergency department, those patients with chronic illness, such as COPD, they will often score high on a news, yet the issue they are presenting with will not be related to their respiratory condition. So consequently, you could have them at a 7 and a triage 4. And how do you marry that? Also, your chest pains will score 0, yet they're a triage 2, and your subarachs will be a 1 or a 2, and they score 0. So how do you marry that and manage that risk? And we couldn't find a solution. And the emergency medicine, our own constituents were not happy with that, and we did contact sites in the UK, Northern Ireland, to get what their solutions, but nobody actually really developed a solution. And they decided that if we were going to do this, we didn't want a system that we were going to set somebody to fail in. And that was the big concern. that somebody was going to be triaged as a 4, and yet their news said they were a 7, which means you should escalate, but their presenting complaint was a 4. You know, some of the vague abdo pains are going to be 4s. Then you have the MIs that are being triaged 1 and 2, and they're scoring 0 because their vital signs are normal. And
at the moment.
Yeah, we just couldn't bridge that. We couldn't find a way around the risk. So that's why aggregate scoring just wasn't going to happen here.
That seems very logically worked through, actually. I hadn't really considered it in that much depth, Fiona, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Doesn't actually really fit, does it?
Yeah. No. And the monitoring of the waiting room. So we now have a staff nurse and sometimes a HCA with them. Our HCA grades, our healthcare assistant grades, are different to yours in the UK. And we're only really getting them doing vital signs in emergency departments now. They hadn't really up to now because there was so much other work for them to do. But their numbers are going to increase to 15% of our work, of our staffing. So, but you know, certainly the first site that went live, they went live before COVID hit, and they said that through COVID, having the tool up and running was very beneficial, because all the deteriorations are documented, and then when they went back to look at cases for whatever reason, the nursing, the way it was documented, the way the deterioration was flagged and escalated was very clear. You know, I mean, we are lucky in emergency care that we do have our doctors, you know, on site. And I mean, you know, we are supposed to use this bar. It is in the national guidelines, and we do where possible, you know, when we're doing communications on the phone. But if you've got a patient who you don't like the look of, because we are such a visual specialty, we just grab the nearest doctor and say, come here with me. You know, you don't give them an option to go elsewhere. We just bring them and say, this patient isn't right and I need you to sort them. You know, I mean, if they've been seen, then you ideally get the doctor that saw them where possible, unless they're too junior, you know. But it is you know, it's the system is worked like it, you know, once it's used right and you use the exclusion criteria, it is, the workload is manageable. But it is a change, and like all changes, it's taken a lot to manage it into the system.
Well, think how long it took for Manchester Triage to come in.
Yeah.
Or indeed any triage system, because we didn't really have one much before Manchester. And I remember how long that took.
Yeah.
I remember how long that took to get our heads round. And that saved us a lot of unpleasantnesses in waiting rooms that we hadn't picked up just because everyone was in time order.
When I started in emergency in 1987, Shireen Mullidge was only starting triage then, and it was minor A, minor B, major A, major B, and resus. That were the titles. No, we didn't have resus. Major A was resus. But anyway, so escalation support. These systems are out there. We don't really use them in emergency departments because we have our own in-house resuscitation systems. But on the wards, there's rapid response teams, medical emergency teams, depending which tools you look at, and there's critical care outreach, which are predominantly nurse practitioner led, which is great to see. So, you know, they're out there on the wards. As I said, now we don't really use them in emergency departments. And even if it is an admitted patient deteriorates, because emergency nursing and medicine are doing the resuscitation while we wait for the in-house team to come down, we don't bother calling them because we have everything we need, you know. So, so the audit tools, with implementation, you're kind of steadily auditing as you go through, and it's through audit that we get our learnings. And unfortunately, when things go pear-shaped, it's recommended with all these tools, whether it be triage or early warnings, that they're done 6 monthly, proving very difficult to do at the moment because
can imagine
stress. And there are three aspects to the audits. You've got your vital signs, your monitoring plans, and your event logs. Now, what we recommend with the event logs is, because they don't happen that often, is when somebody triggers, photocopy the escalation piece that you do, the actual event log, and keep that separately, because then you can trace back easily for the ones when you're doing that piece of the audit. And use the audit findings for your annual updates. All staff should be updated annually, as with Manchester Triage. Education, so except for eMuse, all the other tools have e-learnings, but we will have an e-learning shortly, she says, when she gets her 40,000 euros. The e-learnings are great, but you do need some face-to-face scenario-based training to have that discussion piece. So generally speaking, what you do is we use Compass, the Australian, as the background for our HSE Land news base. And then we encourage people to do some scenarios as well. And all the education programs have continuing professional development points as well, which everybody wants to know about. So the future of early warning systems, we are currently looking at refining the parameters for the over 75s. Yep.
Well, a lot of stuff changes quite dramatically at 75, doesn't it?
Yeah. We're writing the paper on it at the minute. So I thought I might have it ready for tonight, but we're not quite there. Then, in the new versions of iNews and News, there is some more lenience about chronic disease, but between chronic disease and specialist areas, I know neurology are looking at devising a separate system, because the news isn't working well for the strokes and some other cases, some other areas. So I think there will be more systems that will be specialty specific. E-monitoring, I mean, it's the way things are going, and we've just started doing that on some wards, and they obviously, the e-monitoring, when you have the right systems in place, generate the e-alerts to the appropriate people when somebody is hitting a red flag. And wearable devices, I did a bit of work around that when I was developing guidance, because obviously we don't know whatever any of our patients have from infectious side. So when I was looking at wearable devices, I was also looking at disposable wearable devices, but you need a good Wi-Fi system in your department for a lot of that stuff to work. But it's getting cheaper, and the technology is advancing at a very rapid rate. So I'd say within 5 years, it's how we'll be doing things in emergency care.
That wouldn't be a bad thing,
Yeah, especially as we've got so many people on corridors.
I know.
Yeah.
Live with that.
I mean, the big thing is that you're using the right early warning system for the right patient in the right setting. That's the important thing with the early warning systems. And at the end of the day, the early warning systems, everybody said, oh, they're escalating too many people. And our worry as well with developing a new system was, were we going to escalate too many? But we've gone back and checked this with the sites that are using it the longest, and the consultants and registrars say the escalations aren't any more than they were getting previously, but they're well structured, and patients, there is evidence that patients are being captured earlier, which is what you want. So, I mean, as the slide says, early warning systems don't create sick people. They were always there. Now we just can find them. Which is a quote from the news.
Which is what we wanted to do. Yeah. That was exactly the point.
Yeah. And it gives the junior staff proper structure. So in summary, we've discussed the different types in use, and that they're used to support clinical assessment, that there's aggregate and single trigger systems, the pitfalls around recording manually, and that writing doesn't always end up in the right box. we've got digital recording devices coming in now, and the wearable devices. So now, any questions? That's the QR
zap
tonight.
zap your QR code with your second device. We're making assumptions here that you've got a second device available as well as the one you're watching us on, but zap the QR code, and that will enable you, that will take you through to an evaluation form for this session. Pick the title of the session, which is Early Warning Systems, fill in all the boxes, and that, when you press submit, that will obviously send us your evaluation form, but more importantly, it will land in your inbox within 10 minutes, fully completed, ready for you to file in your e-portfolio as evidence that you have attended the session and given some thought to what Fiona's been talking about and how that might affect your own practice. Ready for your revalidation, and or showing to your manager if your manager is one of those that's giving you time back for part or all of watching these webinars.
There are some slides there at the end that just with a few references pertaining to Irish documents, UK documents, and some general papers relating to early warning systems.
You want to just go through those, Fiona, so that folks can stop them at various points when they
So there's the Irish references. They all pertain to national clinical guidelines. Then the UK references, I've just got
nice guidance.
Your nice guidance. The international, they were the Australian, New Zealand documents. Australia's done a lot of work on this. And then there's 2 slides, and these references are more current, and then the other ones are some older ones, but some, I mean, Chris Soub from North Wales, he's done a lot of work on this, and Damien Rowland, and there's so they've done a lot of work, so that's why I put those slides in, because they're kind of sentinel pieces of work, even though they are very old.
Old doesn't mean to say it's not seminal.
No,
old doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't still go back and read it.
We're still quoting Benner and Florence.
Yep.
So
we are on Roper, Logan and Tierney. And
yep. So the next MFEN lecture is on Thursday, the 8th of December. It's at 7 o'clock again, and I will be discussing triage scales at that point.
And that'll be really good, Fiona, because triage and early warning kind of complement each other, don't they?
In actual fact, I probably should have done them the other way around. Anyway,
what the heck? We've done them this way around.
Yep.
All the webinars are available in the library on the website. So those of you who want to watch it again, you can, once Fiona's done triage scales and it's in the library, you can go and watch it the other way around and see if it makes more sense the other way around or not. Thank you very much indeed, Fiona.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to the next one on the 8th of December.
Great.